there's still places we haven't gone. And I'd like to hear about January 6th as well, because there's a huge story there that we haven't even delved into. So is it reasonable to leap to that?
Pretty much.
Okay, let's do that then.
Yeah.
Okay.
So in the middle of all these lawsuits, I have this burning passion for 2 to 3 years just to keep speaking publicly. And one of those days of speaking publicly happened to be January 6th in Washington, D.C. My perspective was it was another speaking engagement. I spoke January 5th in Washington, D.C. I spoke January 3rd in Florida, January 10th in Florida. But the 5th and 6th, I was scheduled in Washington, D.C.
Where were you supposed to speak?
January 5th, no problem, Freedom Plaza. January 6th, scheduled to speak on the east side of the Capitol with a permit. There you go.
Okay.
With a permit. People don't know that. So I was there to speak. When
Who were you speaking with or to?
I don't know who organized it. I had a team at that point, and there were about 20 speakers, including incoming Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene and Paul Gosar, another representative. It was a pretty high profile speaking opportunity. People were, of course, speaking about their concerns that the election was stolen. But my lane was to speak about medical freedom. I had a prepared medical freedom speech that I did the day before, no problem, Freedom Plaza. And I was intending to do the same thing on January 6th, the east side of the Capitol building. It's called Section 8, and I had a permit. And when we speakers presented ourselves at the location, we were told by whoever was there that we couldn't speak. Now,
That you couldn't speak.
they wouldn't allow, there was a stage set up, but they weren't allowing anybody to speak. Everyone asks me why. I don't know. Still don't know. I think because the crowds were so large. I don't know. If you have a large crowd, it seems to me you ought to let people speak. So there's a positive energy source for the crowd to pay attention to. But for whatever reason, they would not let the speakers speak. So I was there on the Capitol, basically ready to give a speech. So I said, well, I'm speaking. And so I scampered up to the top of the steps and I started speaking, but I have 0 microphones or anything. And of course, within a minute or two, I stop because no one can hear me. There's a lot of people and I'm standing at the top of the Capitol steps and people are pouring in by the second because Trump had finished speaking and everyone was walking over. And I'm telling you, every minute had another 1,000 people showing up there. Because that was the time Trump had stopped. And so I'm just standing there and I'm kind of smushed against the wall. And all of a sudden, the doors opened from the inside. And I was swept into the building. This is all on video. I can't imagine what they would say about me if there was no video. Because you can actually see on the video that I kind of tumble and I almost fall into the building because there's a surge behind me. And I find myself in the Capitol. And it's hard to remember what life was like before J6, but we have a long history in our nation of political protests. Now, when conservatives landed in the Capitol, standing there, everywhere I was very peaceful, completely peaceful. I find myself in the rotunda. It's beautiful. And I'm walking between the ropes and I'm looking up here because it turns out there was video everywhere. I didn't know. And you can see me walking peacefully in between the ropes, looking around, and I've got my speech in my hand. And I think to myself, it is a fine idea that I should give my speech because this is a political day and let's give a speech. And there's a lot of people here. So I give my speech and that is also seen on video. And it's kind of funny when I'm thinking back on it, but that was my mission. And then a little bit later, I give my speech again. And then an officer taps me on my shoulder and says I have to move along. And I'm startled. I look at him and then I move along. And then I exit the building. And that was my sojourn into the Capitol on January 6th, 2021. And I had no idea what was being said about the day. As an eyewitness on the east side of the Capitol, no violence, kumbaya, literally grandmas singing kumbaya, moms with strollers. And that's what it was. It was very large. It seemed more like the energy of a sporting event or a concert, large. And that was it. And then we leave and we got dinner and I didn't have any news on it.
Did you think anything of it after that?
No. So I didn't. And I was in DC another day and I'm always working and I'm just typing away and people are saying it's something. And I'm like, no, it was nothing. And I'm just typing and I meet friends that night for dinner. And the friends are very, very, very alarmed when I said we were at the Capitol. And they say, oh my God, there was an insurrection. It was an insurrection. I'm like, and I start laughing. Like, what are you talking about? Like, I just thought, I was like, no, I was there. Like, no, what are you talking about? And they were very, very worried for me. And I'm sitting at dinner and I get a message on my phone, and there's a picture of me on the FBI's most wanted list with my picture.
Oh, that's a problem.
And I look at it.
Wow.
And my first reaction was, well, this was Photoshopped. This is like a joke.
Right.
I mean, I still can't believe it. You can, I'm on the FBI's most wanted list. Like,
wow.
And so they have a picture of me. Somebody handed me a megaphone, and I was giving my speech. And that was the picture of me on the FBI's most wanted list. And I was like, no. And I just couldn't believe it. And then the next day I started getting a little bit worried. But I went off 4 days later and I gave another speech in Florida. And I went back years later and I watched that speech, and I never even mentioned January 6th, just to give you perspective that I didn't think. And then 12 days later, I'm in my apartment working, and the most horrific, loudest, I can't do it justice, scream banging on the door, FBI, 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 so loud that I immediately thought, well, it can't possibly be the FBI because this must be a Colombia cartel coming to murder me. Of course, this couldn't be the FBI. Like, I remember thinking, couldn't possibly be the FBI. Like, they would have called me. Like, and they're screaming, and I'm looking at the person I'm working with. I'm like, is that real? And he says, no, that's not real. I mean, it just couldn't process it. About 30, 40 seconds go by, and I stand up, and I turn to kind of come, and they break the door down with a battering ram.
This is at your home?
Yep. 2-bedroom apartment, and battering ram, 20 guys in tactical gear, bulletproof vest and tactical gear, huge weapons pointed at me, the laser sight beams as close as I am to you. And I'm looking at them, I'm like, that's weird. And you asked me if I panic. And I remember thinking, oh. And I got really calm. And as soon as I realized that, before that, he had said to me, turn around, like screaming. And I was disoriented, and I took a step forward.
Oh, yeah.
And I thought later, he definitely could have been justifiable homicide. And then I saw the sight beams. I'm like, and I got really calm, and I was fine. And I put this, and they are coming to arrest me.
So the emergency room training came in handy then.
And you know what else clicked in there about the ER? So they're taking us off of handcuffs and shackles. It was crazy. And I was very calm. I said, hey, you took my phone, you took computers, you took everything. Could I take some cash with me? Because at some point you're going to release me and I'm going to need a way home.
Yeah.
Nope, can't do that. I'm like, okay. I say that not incidentally. So they whisk us off. We go to jail, perp walk in front of the neighbors, handcuffs, shackles.
Yeah. So that's the point of the theater.
Yeah. The theater is, I think the whole thing was to intimidate and scare me and others.
Did it work?
It backfires is what it does. Oh, at the time, yes, but now I don't think there's anything I'm afraid of now. I mean, if you had said to me beforehand, would you be afraid of being in prison? Would you be afraid of being in isolation? What is worse? What is worse than that? And now I'm like, I don't like it. It's unpleasant, but okay. Like, you can't scare me with it. Like, you could probably still scare you with that. You can't scare me with that. Like, it's terrible, granted, but okay. So no, it totally backfires on people like me. I mean, it's literally it's a foolish move if you're trying to silence people like me. It's just backfires. Now, they don't know ahead of time who's strong and who's not strong. But handcuffed, shackled, walking right good in front of the neighbors, doors, broken. I happen to have had a gun in the house. They asked me where it was. I told them where it was. We get taken off, etc. All this stuff. I mentioned just 2 small things because they're trying to be as dehumanizing as possible. One is when they release me, I go from being like this hardened criminal to being released in a matter of 1 minute, basically. The judge is like, you can be released. And then they have shackles off, and they literally kick me out on the street, downtown Los Angeles. I have no shoes because they didn't let me take shoes. And I said, how am I going to get home? And the officer says, you should have thought of that. And I just got so snippy. I said, I am an ER doctor. I know exactly what it's like to show up somewhere unprepared, and I wasn't going to, and I wanted to bring money. You didn't let me. How am I going to get home? I had no way. I had no phone. It was insane.
Wow.
So I'm just sharing that it's done to break you. And the other thing that they did that was very effective, they took all of our computers and phones.
Yeah.
And so my piece of advice for anyone listening is have backups and not to worry too much about what you're writing, assuming you're doing lawful activities, just have lots of backups everywhere.
Right. Right. Okay. Now you went to trial for this.
Yes. So this is very funny. You will enjoy this story. So there's no right to a speedy trial, even though that's in our Constitution. They delayed until the government was ready to go. And then my judge couldn't have been faster. So, I found out I had been charged with.
Where were you tried?
All J6 defendants were being tried in the District of Columbia. Nobody, that was intentional. And none of us are from the District of Columbia.
Yeah.
And the District of Columbia voted 96% for Biden. And this was a political issue.
Yeah.
So it's not, and it's a company town. The largest employer, I think 30% of people, or 20 or 30% of people that live in DC work for the federal government. So by definition, it's a company town, plus it's a political trial. So not moving was really unfair to J6 defendants. So I had every intention of fighting and pleading not guilty until I saw the charges. So the charges included a bizarre 1512C2 felony that's 20-year felony. It's bizarre. It's an accounting kind of firm. Remember the Enron scandal? The theory was that Arthur Andersen, their accounting firm, shredded documents. So to close that loophole, it's called closing the Arthur Andersen loophole. Somebody 20 years ago came up with this 1512C2 statute, which is witness tampering and evidence shredding. That is what they charged me and hundreds of J6ers with. You might ask why? Because it's wholly irrelevant, has nothing to do with us. 20 years. That was why. This is how they got J6ers to take a plea.
I see.
They said,
so that was the biggest club they could wield.
And we had and I'm a lawyer too, and I'm looking at this and said, what does this 1512 witness tampering and evidence shredding statute have to do with me? I was literally walking through crowds and gave a speech. I understood trespass. I understood parading. Then we could talk about selective prosecution, like why are you prosecuting me and not everybody from the Summer of Love?
Conservatives don't get to protest. That's really the rule.
But this was weird. This 20-year felony was weird. It had no relation at all to us. And I couldn't, it was 20-year penalty. So this is how they got virtually everybody to roll over. They were very, very eager for J6ers to just take a plea. So the narrative is, oh, we all pled guilty. It was just a terrible thing. So when I discovered it was a 20-year felony, I did take the plea. I couldn't afford a felony as a doctor and a lawyer. There was no way I could keep my life. I mean, as a practical matter, I would have lost my licenses. And I had an organization to run. I couldn't be put away for years. It was out of the question. And on a personal level, it's pretty scary. So for all of those reasons, I accepted the plea. And I plead to a misdemeanor trespass. Now, exactly how many misdemeanors do you find going to prison? Low number. That zero number that you like.
Yeah.
No misdemeanors in America go to prison. So I was expecting when I showed up at trial to...
Right, and that would be an expected part of the plea too, right? That would have been your presumption.
That you go through the person's past. Does she have a violent past? Has she ever been convicted of anything?
Yeah.
You know, is this a gang offense? Is there violence here? You know, does she have a way to employ herself? You know, there's a lot of risks that go into when you put someone into prison or not. Of course, I didn't think I was going to prison.
Yeah.
Now, we don't have a ton of time, but I will share with you a very cute little story, which is that my judge was a fellow named the Honorable Christopher Cooper. Now, I didn't recognize the name, except when I showed up in court. That was Casey. Casey was my classmate at Stanford Law School. Class of 147 of us. 147. Of course we knew each other. We kind of lightly dated.
Wow.
Okay?
Wow.
And I thought that if anything, he would have been nicer to me. Like, certainly we had nothing negative, really. But he should have recused himself.
Right.
Because the standard for recusal is not just conflict. It's the appearance of impropriety. It's not the actual impropriety. It's the appearance of impropriety. I mentioned this little interesting aside because the District of Columbia judges, almost to a man, are so smug that they don't even think they're going to be overruled if you've been to school and dated a defendant. They're like, oh, no, that's no problem. And I am sad as a lawyer to know that's the standard.
Yeah.
So the appearance of impropriety, which of course this is, and I bring it up because when I stood before him, I felt this heat of hatred and anger emanating from him. All the other hearings every month were on Zoom, but for sentencing, I had to show up in person. And there was so much hatred from him towards me that I will never know if it was personal or just his beliefs on J6. And he should never have been in that situation. That is why judges who have an appearance of impropriety are to recuse themselves.
Right.
And I just want everyone to be cognizant of what the infrastructure of fascism is kind of already there in America. No one's checking him. Anyone responsible would have said, get off this case. It's crazy. There's other judges. He didn't. So that exists. Anyway, he sentences me to 60 days, which was insanely harsh. And then the Bureau of Prison puts their thumb on the scale. And instead of sending me to a camp, they send me to a maximum.
Really?
Yeah. So you ask me.
So you got 60 days in prison for a misdemeanor.
Yeah.
Despite your record.
Right.
Yeah, well, everybody who's watching and listening should pay careful attention to that.